There is a moment at a party, or a family dinner, or anywhere the room fills up with voices, when something shifts. You are standing with a drink in your hand. Someone is telling a story to your left. Two other conversations are happening behind you. A television is on somewhere. A child is running through the room. And you notice, in a way you could not have articulated 10 years ago, that every single one of those sounds has equal weight. None of them recede. None of them blur into background. They are all just there, pressing in, demanding something from you. So you find a chair. Maybe near a window. Maybe in the hallway. You tell yourself you just need a minute. And in that minute, something in you exhales, quietly, gratefully, in a way that nobody around you would understand. You used to be the one who stayed until the end. Who could hold 3 conversations and still drive home feeling full. And now there is a part of you that wonders what that means. Whether something is slipping. Whether this is how it begins. It is not. Most people assume that when crowded rooms start to feel overwhelming after 60, it is a sign of the brain pulling back, becoming less capable, less social, less sharp. It feels that way. It makes sense that it would feel that way. But the reality is far more extraordinary than that. What is actually happening inside your brain in that moment, in that room, with all those voices pressing in, is not retreat. It is something that researchers spent decades misreading. And what they eventually found will change the way you see every quiet moment you have chosen since. Welcome back to the Aging Mind. Subscribe before you leave, because what you are about to learn will change how you see every quiet moment you have ever chosen, and every crowded room you have ever wanted to leave. Today we are going through 8 things your brain is doing when noise becomes too much. Stay until the end, because the final section, the quiet advantage, is the one that neuroscientists themselves found surprising. And it is the one most people over 60 have never been told about their own minds. Number 1. The filter shift, ****. You are at a restaurant. Not a loud one, just a normal Wednesday evening place, the kind you have been going to for years. But tonight something is different. The conversation at the table behind you keeps pulling your attention. The music, which you are fairly sure you could not name, seems intrusive in a way it never used to. Your companion says something and you miss the second half of it because a burst of laughter from across the room landed at exactly the wrong moment. You apologize. You lean in. You try harder. And the trying itself is exhausting. Most people assume this is hearing loss, or distraction, or simply getting older in the most ordinary sense of the phrase. That is not what is happening. Dr. Lynn Hasher at the University of Toronto spent years studying what she called inhibitory control, the brain's mechanism for actively suppressing irrelevant information. Her team found something that reframed everything: younger brains don't just hear relevant sounds more clearly. They actively silence the irrelevant ones. They have a neural gating system that decides, in real time, what gets through and what gets filtered out at the source. As the brain matures past 60, that gate loosens. Not breaks, loosens. The suppression mechanism becomes less aggressive. What this means is that the older brain is not struggling to focus. It is receiving more. Every channel is open. Every signal is coming through at something closer to full volume. What this means for you is that the exhaustion you feel in a noisy room is not weakness. It is the metabolic cost of processing far more information than the person sitting across from you. Your brain is doing more work, not less. The gate is open because the brain has changed its relationship with what it considers worth keeping out. But what that open gate actually lets in, that is where this gets genuinely remarkable. Number 2. The bigger net, ****. There is a thing that happens in conversations, you have probably noticed it without naming it. Someone tells a story and you catch something the others miss. A hesitation in the middle of a sentence. A word chosen carefully to avoid another word. The way a person's mood shifted 3 exchanges ago and has been quietly coloring everything since. You do not know how you know. You just do. Most people assume this is intuition, or experience, or simply the accumulated pattern recognition of a long life. That is part of it, but only part. Researchers at Harvard Medical School studying what they call defocused attention found that the same loosened filtering system that makes crowded rooms harder also dramatically expands semantic awareness, the brain's ability to hold connections between things that are not obviously connected. Younger brains, with their tight filters, are excellent at staying on task. They hear the words that were said. The aging brain, with its wider net, catches the words that were almost said. The emotional register underneath the literal content. The thing in the room that nobody mentioned. One specific finding stopped the research team. Older adults in their studies were significantly better at solving problems that required connecting distant, unrelated concepts, not despite their less filtered attention, but because of it. What this means for you is that what feels like an inability to tune things out is simultaneously an extraordinary capacity to take things in. The crowded room is harder. But the quiet conversation, the real one, the one underneath the one everyone is having, that is where your mind is operating at something the younger brain simply cannot access. There is more to this. Because the brain is not just changing what it receives. It is changing what it is willing to spend. Number 3. The energy budget, ***. You drive home from dinner. It was a good dinner. People you like, food that was fine, nothing difficult happened. And yet you are, there is no other word for it, depleted. Not tired the way you are after a long walk or a day of physical work. Tired in a different place. Somewhere behind your eyes. Somewhere that sleep will fix but nothing else will. Most people assume this is simply age, the general fatigue of getting older, the body winding down. That is not the full picture. Researchers at a Duke University neuroscience lab studying neural energy expenditure found that the aging brain working in complex auditory environments, rooms with overlapping voices, background music, competing stimuli, burns metabolic resources at a measurably higher rate than younger brains in the same environment. Not because the aging brain is inefficient, but because it is processing more of what it receives rather than blocking it at the gate. The brain runs on glucose. Sustained, high-load processing, the kind required when every channel is open, draws heavily on that supply. One specific finding from the Duke work: older adults showed elevated prefrontal metabolic activity even during passive listening in noisy environments, activity levels that younger participants only reached during active, demanding cognitive tasks. What this means for you is that the exhaustion you bring home from a crowded evening is a real and measurable neurological event. It is not in your head, it is literally in your head, in the most precise sense. You are not less resilient. You are spending something real, on something real. And your body is correctly reporting the bill. What the brain is doing with that energy, why it is spending it the way it is, that is what the next piece explains. Number 4. The depth preference, ***. Think about the conversations you actually remember from the last few years. Not the ones at parties. Not the ones in crowded rooms where you had to lean in and ask people to repeat themselves. The ones you remember are smaller. One person. Enough quiet to actually think. A conversation that went somewhere neither of you expected. You have probably noticed you seek those out more now. That the other kind, the surface kind, the performing kind, the kind where you report facts about your life to near strangers, leaves you feeling strangely empty even when it goes well. Most people assume this is introversion, or social anxiety, or simply caring less about other people than they once did. That is not what is happening. Dr. Laura Carstensen at the Stanford Center on Longevity spent decades developing what she calls socio-emotional selectivity theory, and what her research found was both precise and quietly profound. As the brain's time horizon shifts, as people move through their 60s and beyond, the brain does not become less social. It becomes more selective about what kind of social contact it finds meaningful. It begins optimizing for emotional depth over social breadth. For presence over performance. This is not a preference the conscious mind decides. It is a neurological recalibration. The brain begins treating surface-level social stimulation as low-return investment and deep connection as high-return. It is not pulling away from people. It is pulling toward what actually matters in people. What this means for you is that every time you have chosen one real conversation over a room full of shallow ones, your brain was not malfunctioning. It was following a blueprint that decades of neuroscience have since confirmed. The preference is not a symptom. It is intelligence. And there is a condition in which that intelligence operates best, one that will surprise you. Number 5. The noise paradox, ****. There is a time of day, you probably know exactly which one, when your mind is most itself. Early morning, perhaps, before the neighborhood wakes up. Or late evening, after the house goes quiet. A specific kind of stillness in which thoughts arrive whole, in which problems you have been circling for days suddenly have edges you can see clearly. You probably assumed everyone felt this way. That the quiet was just a preference, a personality thing, the kind of thing people mean when they say they are a morning person. Most people assume that older brains need stimulation, engagement, noise, activity, to stay sharp. The research says something almost exactly opposite. Scientists at the Rotman Research Institute in Toronto studying prefrontal cortex function in aging adults found that older brains do not simply cope with quiet environments, they measurably outperform in them. When the stimulus load drops, the aging prefrontal cortex activates compensatory neural pathways that produce a quality of judgment and integrative thinking that younger brains, optimized for speed and stimulation, do not reliably access. One finding in particular, older adults in low-noise conditions showed superior performance on tasks requiring the synthesis of complex, ambiguous information, the kind of judgment that cannot be rushed or crowded into. The kind that requires space. What this means for you is that the quiet you keep finding your way back to is not avoidance. It is optimal operating conditions. The brain is not hiding from the world in those moments. It is doing its best work. The silence is not empty. It is full of something the noise was covering. But there is a distinction worth making, between what the brain is doing and what it is usually called. Number 6. The hidden signal, ****. At some point, maybe gradually, maybe all at once, someone in your life used a word. Possibly introvert. Possibly sensitive. Possibly just quieter than you used to be. And you may have accepted that framing, worn it loosely, wondered if it was true. The framing is not quite right. Most people assume that the pull toward quieter environments, fewer people, more deliberate social contact, is a personality trait, something you either always were or have become. That conflation turns out to be scientifically significant. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development studying what they call neural selectivity found a clear and meaningful distinction between two things that look identical from the outside: introversion, a stable personality trait present across the lifespan, and neurological selectivity, a specific adaptive shift in how the aging brain allocates attention and processes social stimuli. They are different mechanisms. They produce similar behavior. And they are almost always conflated. The distinction matters because neural selectivity is not a fixed personality. It is a signal. It is the brain communicating, in the clearest way it knows how, which environments allow it to function at its highest level and which environments extract more than they return. What this means for you is that what you may have been calling a personality is also, and perhaps more accurately, information. Your brain is telling you something about itself. And the fact that you are listening, the fact that you have started honoring what it is asking for, is not withdrawal. It is wisdom responding to data. What most people do with that information, the guilt, the second-guessing, the social obligations kept out of fear of what declining means, that is what comes next. Number 7. The social recalibration, ****. You have probably turned down invitations. Not many, maybe, or maybe quite a few. A dinner here, a gathering there. You said you were tired, or busy, or not feeling quite right. And afterward, some part of you wondered whether that was the beginning of something. Whether pulling back was the thing that would accelerate the pulling back. The fear is understandable. The fear is also, it turns out, pointed in the wrong direction. Most people assume that more social contact, more events, more people, more engagement with the world, is the prescription for a healthy aging brain. The data says something more specific. Researchers at the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research followed thousands of adults over 65 across a multi-decade longitudinal study tracking what actually predicted brain health, cognitive resilience, and emotional well-being in later life. They found, with a precision that surprised even the researchers, that quantity of social contact had no significant relationship to brain health outcomes. None. What mattered, the only social metric that consistently predicted better outcomes, was the quality of social contact. Whether it felt meaningful. Whether it left the person feeling seen rather than depleted. What this means for you is that every invitation you honored when you did not want to, every gathering you attended out of obligation rather than genuine desire, may have been a cost rather than a benefit. And every evening you protected, every quiet dinner, every real conversation, every deliberate choice to spend your social energy somewhere that actually returned something, that was not decline. That was calibration. That was your brain making the right call with the information it had. You have been listening to your brain for a long time, whether you knew it or not. And that brings us to the last thing. The one that has nothing to do with science, and everything to do with you. Number 8. The quiet advantage, ****. There is something nobody says out loud about this, about the particular experience of moving through the world in a mind that has become more selective, more sensitive, more honest about what it needs. It can be lonely. Even when you are not alone. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from standing in a room full of people and feeling, not superior, not separate, but simply elsewhere. Like you arrived at a frequency the room is not broadcasting on. Like the conversation everyone is having is slightly adjacent to the one you would actually want to have. You have probably wondered, in those moments, whether something essential was leaving you. Whether this was loss wearing a quiet disguise. It is not loss. And it has never been loss. What you have been experiencing, the retreat from noise, the pull toward depth, the need for stillness, the bone-tiredness that a crowded evening leaves behind, is a brain that has spent 60, 70, 80 years accumulating a particular kind of intelligence. Not the fast kind. Not the kind that performs well under fluorescent lights with 10 people talking at once. The other kind. The kind that sees what is actually happening in a room. The kind that knows when someone is not fine even though they said they were fine. The kind that can sit with a hard question long enough to find an honest answer instead of a convenient one. That is not a diminished thing. That is a rare thing. And the world is not particularly good at honoring it, which is its own kind of loss, but not yours. You spent decades showing up. You filled the rooms. You stayed until the end. You were present for other people in ways that cost you something real, and you paid that cost without complaint because that was what was needed and you were someone who showed up when things were needed. You are still that person. Your brain has simply gotten more honest about the price. More deliberate about where it spends what it has. More clear-eyed about which rooms are worth entering and which ones were never really asking for you anyway, only for your performance of yourself. The quiet you keep returning to is not emptiness. It is where you actually live now. It is where your thinking is clearest, your presence most complete, your sense of yourself most intact. It is not a consolation prize for the person who used to love parties. It is what the party was always supposed to be leading toward, the real conversation, after all the noise. Your brain is not protecting you from the world. It is protecting what is most valuable in you for the world that deserves it. Tell me in the comments, is there a specific place, or a time of day, or a particular kind of conversation where your mind feels most like itself now? Not the way it used to feel, but the way it actually feels when it is fully present and fully alive. You do not have to explain it or justify it. Just name it if you know it. I read every one. I will see you in the next one.